in the morning as I was reading some things for this sermon, and in a voice shaking with tears and fear, she asked if I had time to help her recover from a cyber attack which had happened to her on Friday. She was contacted by scammers claiming to be public servant watchdogs who said they had detected fraudulent activity on her Amazon account and told her that her bank account and her computer were now also at risk if she didn't immediately follow their instructions. She was so thrown off balance, and they seemed kind, so she did what they told her to do. Before she realized they were scammers, they had pocketed thousands of her dollars. Her nervous system was still on high alert from this traumatic experience when she called for some help to try to regulate herself. You and I are on high alert as well from a variety of things. I don't know how it is for you, but I just experienced this sense going in the grocery store and other places. These airborne germs of the COVID pandemic are invisible but deadly. I just can't forget that. And hearing the totals on the news and so on, it's just always there. We look around wondering who will get sick next, or who might be sick now and contagious, but they don't have symptoms, so we don't know. Maybe we ourselves. The smoke of the wildfires out west seems similar. My nephew in Portland, Oregon, said they wear masks more to protect from smoke than COVID these days, and they have stopped up every crack in their house to keep smoke from seeping in. Racism and white privilege are like this too, operating seemingly under the radar until another unashamedly racist remark is made by our president, or another person of color is killed while doing no wrong, or perhaps we ourselves commit a microaggression and don't even know it. And once again, we're hearing that Russian and now Chinese hackers are meddling in our elections, which only adds to our collective angst about November 2nd. And Friday, as Sue shared in the Joys and Concerns, the iconic role model for women and men, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, died, leaving a huge legacy of what John Lewis referred to as good trouble behind her, and a scary Supreme Court vacancy ahead. In our fear of these stealthy anxieties and forces, which feel so overwhelming, it is tempting to isolate ourselves and binge on Netflix or Haagen-Dazs, or just drop into a funk. But what if, as Henry Nouwen wrote in his famous book, Reaching Out, years ago, these realities are challenges to an inner response by which growth takes place and through which we come to the fullness of being? What if the events of our history are molding us as a sculptor molds his clay, and it is only in careful obedience to these molding hands that we can discover our real vocation and become mature people? He goes on, what if history does not prove to be a blind, impersonal sequence of events over which we have no control, but reveals to us a guiding hand, such that fate becomes opportunity, wounds a warning, and paralysis an invitation to search for deeper sources of vitality? What if all of this that's going on helps us refocus on our common humanity? Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. President Barack Obama said it well at Nelson Mandela's funeral in 2013. As you may remember, Mandela became president of South Africa after 27 years in prison. His crime was fighting to overturn the cruel apartheid system of white supremacy. In prison, he became friends with the white prison guards and eventually met with the white president of the country to discuss how to end apartheid without bloodshed. The threat was real, as the poison of years, really decades of hatred and revenge was understandable, and violence from the Black majority seemed inevitable. Were it not for Mandela's leadership and others, the country would have been shredded, but instead it carefully moved into a democracy with Black and white leadership. At the funeral, President Obama said, "There is a word in South Africa, Ubuntu, a word that captures Mandela's greatest gift, his recognition that we are all bound together in ways that are invisible to the eye, that there is a oneness to humanity that we achieve ourselves by sharing ourselves with others and caring for those around us." Mandela not only embodied Ubuntu, he taught millions to find that truth within themselves. Ubuntu, it has a nice ring. The ability to see and act on our common humanity. Can we develop this quality of Ubuntu further in ourselves? Have you heard of the documentary filmmaker Deeyah Kahn? I came across her rather randomly on the internet and was fascinated to hear her talk about the extensive interviews she did with jihadi terrorists and American white supremacists for her documentaries about these two extremist groups. Deeyah said, "Judging and condemning jihadists and white supremacists feels great, but yields little. I made the films to try to understand why people do the things that they do. So the fact that some of them started using words like friends for me, the fact that we were able to build a real relationship was absolutely shocking to me and confusing and something I never would have expected." Deeyah was surprised that people she contacted in these groups were even willing to talk with her. Some spent many, many hours with her over several years, eager to be listened to without judgment. Some eventually left the hate groups in which they had found an identity. She said, "What struck me after the fact is that what interrupted people's hatred and ideology is for someone who represents the other in their eyes to treat them with dignity." She discovered that what young people are attracted to in these organizations is something we can all relate to. They were looking for belonging, purpose, a community that would accept them, a chance to have significance, to feel powerful, and to be heard. Most came from families where they were not seen or valued or given freedom of choice about their lives. They admired and felt cared for by leaders of these hate groups who knew just how to cultivate a fierce loyalty in these young people and even a willingness to die for the cause as a suicide bomber. The motivations of these young people are an example of our common humanity. Who among us doesn't want to be seen, heard, valued, cared for, and have a chance to belong and to contribute? Ubuntu has a nice ring. It is not that we condone violence for a minute, but people who join these hate groups are not completely incomprehensible monsters. Maybe we can empathize with the longings and needs embedded in their horrific behavior without dumping more toxicity and judgment into the world. Deeyah Kahn found that what's behind their rage is pain. Can you and I relate to that in our own relationships? According to recent research in neuroscience, it seems that some of their pain and rage and some of ours actually comes from the inherited unresolved trauma of prior generations. What, you might ask? Come again? You and I have heard it said repeatedly that no one is born a racist. We have to be carefully taught to feel uncomfortable around people of a different race, says the common understanding expressed in the lyrics from the song and the musical, The King and I. But what if some neuroscientists are right, that unresolved pain and rage are stored in bodies and passed on from parent to child over the centuries as reliably as brown eyes and the likelihood of developing heart disease? Books like My Grandmother's Hands and It Didn't Start With You promote this theory. There's one of them. And here's the other. Maybe you can see them. I can't see myself showing them to you. They describe the violent ways that white people punished other white people from the Middle Ages through the Pilgrims and Puritans. The first Europeans to settle in America were not explorers, but refugees fleeing from imprisonment, torture, and mutilation. Nevertheless, these early settlers continued the same cruel practices of civil justice against each other, such as putting wrongdoers in stockades or burning women they thought were witches. And they perpetrated violence against Native Americans through colonization and genocide, and against Blacks through slavery and unjust laws as time moved along. According to the author Resmaa Menakem, this brutalization created trauma that has yet to be healed among white bodies today. So what does this actually mean? Well, the idea is that we not only inherit physical characteristics or propensities toward mental health challenges like a tendency toward depression or anxiety, we inherit generational trauma, which wires our nervous systems for defensiveness, if not overt aggression. We inherit a default for fearing differences, making it harder to recognize our kinship and harder to want to understand others. But we are not stuck here in a hopeless generational download of prejudice, fear, pain, and traumatic injury. Knowing about and cooperating with our own biology can help us. The vagal nerve is a long cranial nerve providing two-way communication between the body and the brain. Our nervous system listens to what is happening inside our body, outside in the world, and also between us and other people. This vagus nerve connects the body with the fight, flight, freeze brainstem area, which is a reactor rather than a thinker. If the message from the body through the vagal nerve is that there's a threat of some kind, the chemicals of cortisol and adrenaline start shooting through our bodies automatically, preparing us to defend ourselves, even before there's any opportunity to think about, is this a real threat or not? These chemicals change the energy that we give off, and when other people's bodies pick up the signals of our contracting in fear, even when we and they are totally unaware of it consciously, their vagal nerve sends a message to their brain stems that they are at risk. We say things like, I can't put a finger on it, but I just didn't feel safe around her. She made me nervous. Or the opposite, I felt so at home with him immediately. There was just so calming about being with him. We're speaking about the regulation, the reactions of our nervous system. When our nervous system is regulated, it means we send out an automatic welcome. Another person's nervous system picks that up and is soothed by it immediately. And another nervous system of someone else responds to that and is regulated too. And it goes on from there. Deb Dana, who teaches what is called the polyvagal theory, which I'm talking about, says, I think this is how the world is going to become a safe place for all humans, one nervous system at a time. That is what my friend wanted when she called to ask for help, regulating her nervous system after the trauma of the cyber attack she had experienced. Why am I saying all of this, and in a sermon, no less? Because sometimes you and I wonder, how can we ever change ourselves? We wonder, why are other people so cruel? Why is it hard to just love God, love neighbor, love ourselves? Well, it's complicated. Some of the trouble may come from leftover trauma we've inherited that we don't even know about, but we can heal it if we become aware of it and recognize it. Some of it may come from not looking deeply enough at what hurts and motivates others and ourselves, not having enough empathy for our common humanity. But if we are intentional, we can push ourselves towards seeking to understand rather than to be understood, even if the choices another person is making are nothing we would ever, ever condone. Neuroscience will continue to teach us about trauma, racism, and how to heal injuries lodged in the body, including those from generations past. I think we can stay tuned, and we will definitely learn more about this whole concept. There are many effective techniques now, but at the most basic level, we know without a doubt that the practices of prayer, meditation, and gratitude positively impact our neurological wiring and regulate our nervous system, which means they help us feel safe and others feel safe with us, and they change our biology and what we pass on to future generations for the better. As Psalm 133 and Micah 6 say, how wonderful it is, how pleasant for God's people to live together in harmony. What shall I bring when I come to worship God? Shall I bring the best calves to burn as offerings? Will God be pleased if I bring thousands of sheep or endless streams of olive oil? No, God has told us what is good. What God requires is this: to do what is just, to show constant love, to live in humble fellowship with our God. Or more simply, as 1 Corinthians 14 says, make love your aim. I said I wanted to begin and end with a story from yesterday. Well, the second story has to do with a wedding I performed for my son Dylan's best friend and his wife. They are a lovely, well-matched couple, and there was a COVID-sized group of parents, grandparents, the maid of honor, and Dylan as the best man. Yesterday was a perfect blue sky day, and the setting was behind a barn in Pipersville, with the beautiful backdrop of horses in a field. The ceremony went swimmingly right to the end. As the bride and groom started to walk up the grassy aisle and the gathered family clapped, Dylan held out his hand to me and said, Mom, what about the rings? In the last-minute switcheroo of the order of traditional and personal vows, things moved around on the page, and I totally overlooked the ring part. So I called the happy couple back for a rewind, and the rings went on, followed by a second kiss and a second announcement of their being husband and wife, and everyone graciously seemed not to mind. It will be one of the stories told and retold about their otherwise beautiful and rather perfect wedding. But afterwards, it got me to thinking about the purpose of rings. A wedding ring is a symbol of something already there, a reminder of love and intention. So I began to wonder, what about this common humanity, this idea of Ubuntu? What if we each got a special different ring to wear, at least occasionally, as a reminder of our commitment as Christians to love the whole human family, those who are like us and perhaps especially those who are not? And what if this helped us do what is just and loving toward the world, ourselves, and others? Maybe God requires this of us because God wired us for this deep connection in the first place. Maybe an Ubuntu ring can remind us that being woven together in unity and love is what fulfills us, what heals trauma, and what will sustain the world. Amen.